Welcome to Norse Code, the number one podcast for your Minnesota Vikings. I'm your host producer. My name is James Pagashnik. Thank you guys so much for listening. And at the other end of the tin cannon string, we have our analyst and co-host. You know him from numerous blogs and podcasts around the internet, most notably from the Wide Left Substack. He is Mr. Useful Human, Arif Hassan. Arif, it's a darn shame that there was no news of any importance that came out today about the Vikings, and that this is just another boring Monday after a loss. That's, in case you were wondering, that is what it sounds like when you stare into the void and the void stares back. We will have all sorts of things to talk about. The Vikings lost in I'd say a heartbreaker, but really it was just sad. Yeah,
it wasn't. It was just I don't even know how to be. It was just a slow drip feed of pain.
Yeah. So it wasn't as bad as the 0-3 game against the Raiders, but not without trying. It really tried to be the 0-3 game against.
Hey, Nick Mullins took some shots in that game. That was at least funny.
Yeah, there was at least that. This wasn't even entertaining to watch in any way, shape, or form. You couldn't turn this into a drinking game. How about that? So we do have the Falcons game to talk about. We also have some information about J.J. McCarthy and his injury status and what that will mean potentially for the next few games and how excited that makes Arif. And then we have the mailbag as well. And I have assured Arif on multiple occasions there are no special guests appearing on this episode, to which he does not seem to
I'm
believe
just so
me.
concerned that, A, you brought that up apropos of nothing. I had never even considered the possibility that there would be guests until you brought it up. And then I pointed out, you didn't actually need to bring that up. And then you just kept bringing it up. And sometimes in response to completely unrelated matters. They're just entirely non sequiturs. And it's just, I know
that you're going through it right now with the Carson Wentz information. So I'm doing my best to try to make the talent feel better and more comfortable because I know every time
you say the talent, you say that with such extraordinary sarcasm that it penetrates the bones. I get what you're doing with that. But also okay, so I know your game, James. What you're doing right now is you're not going to bring on a guest. What you're doing is you're establishing this kind of credibility so that you can pretend to feel hurt later when you do something and I don't believe you when you say something about the thing that you did and you're like, well, remember the time I said I wouldn't bring on a guest and I didn't? That's not how that works, James.
Look, it's just us tonight, so don't worry about it.
Did you get justice? Did you get justice?
I do not have justice coming on. You can message him. I have not talked to him at all tonight.
Tonight.
I didn't do it this afternoon either, so no. It is just us tonight talking about the game and Carson.
Sure,
Wentz.
Yeah, fine. Yeah, okay, let's talk about the game. What do you want to talk about?
Well, let's chill a little first. If you enjoy the show and would like to help us out financially, there's a couple of different ways you can do that. You can go over to patreon.com/norsecode for $3.50 a month, or a little less for the year subscription. You get access to the Discord, bonus episodes, all of that. New bonus episodes should be coming out here shortly. Special thank you to Michael Dahlstrom for signing up over on Patreon. Thank you so much. I also, if for those Patreon subscribers, I just put out the email. I just put up the link for signing up to the Discord in case you missed it. If you are unable to access that, just let me know and I will get you a new one. So again, thank you to everyone over on Patreon. You can also go to paypal.me/norsecode as well for a one-time donation, or you can go to norsecode.threadless.com for any number of wonderful pieces of Norse Code merchandise. You can get the t-shirts, the baby onesies. There was another cute baby onesie picture posted the other day with your anime face on it with the beard, so the baby looked like you needed to shave. The flags are available. I should pick one of those up for the next live show, I think. And the shower curtains are also available in case you find it easier to cry in the shower after a Vikings loss because you can't tell if it's the shower or if it's your tears coming down on your face. But all things are possible through the power of the Norse Code shower curtain, and that is going to be available over on Threadless. So check that out. All right, let's get into the game itself. And this game sucked. You can't really go wrong by saying something was bad because it was mostly all bad except for some pretty decent defensive play. Instead of focusing on the negative for the moment, what went well for the Vikings outside of like the 6 people who were not injured after the game?
I mean, just generally speaking, pass defense. So I was a little bit critical of the secondary, and I think that's fair. But I think just overall, the pass defense in general came together really well. The Vikings put pressure on Michael Penix at a 42% clip. That's 10 of his 24 dropbacks. And on those plays, he averaged 2.4 yards per attempt. Like he couldn't get the ball moving on those plays. And then, of course, the 3 sacks on top of that. And so the pressure really kind of short circuited what Penix wanted to do. And, he's a quarterback that can take he doesn't take a ton of time necessarily to get rid of the ball, but he can take time if he feels like it's available to him, and that produces like big plays. And the Vikings blitzed at a 50% rate. That forced him to get rid of the ball really quickly. He got rid of the ball in 2.73 seconds. Not like the fastest or anything like that in the NFL. It's not like a 2.4 second average, like we sometimes saw with like Roethlisberger in his later career or Brady in the same situation. But still, like 2.78 seconds, relatively low depth of target. He's a deep ball passer. Keeping him below 7.0 yards for average depth of target, I think is pretty, it's a good accomplishment. That's pretty good marker of success there. But yeah, like I think that the way they designed their pressure scheme really closed down on what Penix was able to do. And yeah, it resulted in the Falcons having negative expected points per play on offense. In fact, the Vikings offense produced more expected points for the Falcons than the Falcons offense did, which we will talk about in a second. But I understand the concern about the running game, right? Like run defense in particular. And I think it's fair to say that like in a vacuum, you want that to get better. Obviously, if that's better, it's better. Good things are good. We've said this on the podcast before. But I think that while there are examples like, Eric Wilson, who I think, has been a huge asset to the team over a game and a half, right? While there are examples of him getting pushed off the ball, or Ivan Pace, missing tackles or whatever, right? Of Javon Hargrave kind of getting closed down in the run game, stuff like that. While those examples exist and are not wonderful, I also think that like the aggressiveness that the Vikings pursue, the blitz is one reason why the run defense was so poor. Like, yeah, you should fit against the run better. The linebacker play was actually pretty poor in run defense, but some of that I think is just a product of being so focused on stopping the pass. And it's like, well, when you do that, when you make an explicit choice to shoot upfield and not hold your gap, to kind of prioritize coverage over the rush, you're going to give up some big gains on the ground. And they did. They were like 6.5 yards a carry. And if that's the trade-off, and it doesn't have to be the trade-off. Last year, the Vikings were one of the best teams in the league against the run, and they also happen to be one of the best teams in the league against the pass. It doesn't have to be the trade-off. So obviously, you want to find ways to improve the run defense without doing that. But if that is kind of the scenario that's being kind of produced here, that the Vikings are reducing their capability to run defense in order to get better at, passing defense, then that is clearly like worth it here. Like, they had like until that final drive, which admittedly you want better run defense for. But at the end of the drive, they were just like allowing the touchdown, right? So it's not really evaluated in the same context as everything else. They had like 5 field goals, and 3 of those field goals came on drives that started in field goal range. Like that's an outstanding defensive performance. There were 2 drives where the Falcons actually produced, more than, drives of over 5 minutes, drained the clock in a way that hurt the Vikings. The rest of the drives were relatively quick. They got the Falcons off the field. They had a relatively poor third down conversion rate until that final drive. So that, I think, is what was good. I think, Ryan Wright played a good game as a punter, which you never really want to focus on, but that's kind of where we're at. He had 4 punts. 2 of them were inside the 20, 51 net. good hang time, which I think given that he was kind of an issue last year, it's nice to see him play well. You'd rather not see him play at all because you don't want him to punt, but he played all right. Will Reichert played all right. That's kind of the highlight on special teams. I don't want, like, if we're still talking about stuff that went good, that's special teams. I've kind of covered it. Well, Ty Felton was an outstanding punt gunner. We'll talk about that in a second too, I'm sure. But yeah, offensively, I don't know. Like TJ Hawkinson looked slow, which is kind of unfortunate. Jalen Naylor looked really good, so I guess that counts for what it's worth, for like whatever value that produces for you. Justin Jefferson, had his yards. He seemed like he played all right. But yeah, like offensively, that's kind of like, yeah. Jalen Redmond had an outstanding game. Jonathan Grenard had a really good game. That's where I'm at.
Okay. So that was just like a couple of minutes.
Great. Fantastic.
That was a couple of minutes. It's good to wrap this up. Nothing else to talk about except the line, the injuries, and the sacks, the questionable passes, the interceptions, the inability to like get the run going. Boy, what am I leaving out? Well, let's start there and see what we'll see if we catch anything later.
Sure. If we just happen to encounter another topic, why not?
Our kicking was fine.
Well, no, I mentioned that. Will Reichert.
Okay.
He kicked the hell out of that ball. Good for you.
All right. The sacks in the offensive line.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's start a little bit with the running game because we touched on that super briefly. I thought Jordan Mason, despite having the worst average of the three runners, the other two being Aaron Jones and JJ McCarthy, I thought probably played really well. Like he does a really good job, forcing missed tackles. I know that Jones had, one of the longer non-scramble runs of the day, kind of late in the game. And I know there's a lot of people that are frustrated that Mason's not getting more, and that Jones seems to be the lead back. But first of all, I mean, Mason did get more carries, but second, I wouldn't use 2 games as an example where, and we'll talk about 2 game samples in a second too, I'm sure, but as an example where you absolutely have to change your approach. But I do think it's smart to continue to modify your approach given that Mason is playing so well. Again, he had a worse rushing average, but I thought that he played better given the blocking that was available to him and what he was able to produce after contact, which good running backs do avoid contact. I think using yards before contact as a pure measure of just offensive line player blocking is misguided because running backs can avoid contact and their vision can prevent it. But here, I think, aside from about like one run where Jones did really well, I thought Mason was the better runner. So there is that, but the running game couldn't get going because of the offensive line. So let's talk about the offensive line. I will say, I think the offensive line played poorly and did not play nearly as poorly as it might seem based off of what we just talked about, which is the running game, as well as you mentioned, 6 sacks, right? So typically when we see 6 sacks in a game, we're pretty upset with the offensive line. And I think it is fair to take a look at the performances that Justin School and Walter Rouse had at left tackle, that Donovan Jackson had at left guard, that Will Fries had at right guard, and that Michael Juergens had at center, and be concerned just from like a pass blocking perspective. They were concerns. From a run blocking perspective, they were concerns. Actually, Walter Rouse was not as bad in pass blocking as you'd think. Honestly, the offensive linemen generally weren't as bad as you would think in pass protection. But as run blockers, they couldn't find ways to generate leverage. They couldn't get to their landmarks. So, like, the Vikings kind of split, halfway between gap runs and zone runs. So half of their runs are zone, half of the runs are gap. And in zone runs, you have kind of landmarks that you want to get to. You want to get on to essentially, like, some coaches will talk about, like, you want to get on these train tracks, right? You want to get moving so that you can get a particular type of leverage against whoever you're blocking. So, a center who's really good at reach blocking, or actually the broadcast isolated Chris Lindstrom, a guard who's really good at reach blocking. What that means is that you're very good at very quickly getting to the other side, the play side essentially of the person you're blocking. They could not consistently do that, and so that's kind of why you saw these holding penalties. Walter Rouse goes in. The first thing he does is draw a holding penalty on a running play. Some of that is a product, and now he was kind of kicking out, so that's not really a zone. But like what happens a lot of the times is that you end up with a holding penalty because you're trying to get to the other side, and you don't have the athleticism or the first step or whatever to get that kind of leverage. So that was a problem in the run game. In the passing game, Justin School did get beat kind of quickly. Donovan Jackson did make some mistakes, right? Will Fries also made some mistakes. But I think the primary issue here is how long J.J. McCarthy held on to the ball. So in this game, let me see if I can confirm this stat, because this was essentially a temporary stat until review. But I'm pretty confident it's still true. Yeah. So McCarthy threw one pass that was under 2.5 seconds. Just one. The lowest proportion of passes under 2.5 seconds that wasn't from McCarthy was Jordan Love, which was 26%. So McCarthy, 4% of passes, or 5, I guess, 4.7% of passes. Jordan Love, 26.5. Like, that's unacceptable. There is no offensive scheme on the planet, including the Vikings, that has it such that the quarterback is on every single play getting rid of the ball after the 2.5 second mark. Now, explosive offenses like the Vikings, like Jordan Love's offense in Green Bay, will do it a lot less often, right? So if you've got somebody like a Jake Browning, who the Vikings will be playing next week, who also happened to lead the league this week in percentage of passes under 2.5 seconds. You've got somebody like Jake Browning who doesn't really have an arm, but thrives on things like pre-snap recognition and anticipation on his throws. You want to get rid of the ball really quickly. If you've got somebody who kind of specializes in the short game, like a Bo Nix, you want to get rid of the ball really quickly. So they all have percentages above 50% in terms of the proportion of plays that are under 2.5 seconds. Interestingly, Sam Darnold, who last year was one of the lowest in the league at 30%, is at 54%, or was at 54% for Seattle this week. So, like, it is possible to do that at a much higher clip, and it's in fact likely that you're going to do that. Now, I mentioned Darnold being the lowest in the league last year, or the second lowest in the league last year. That was also true if you combined all the Vikings quarterbacks in 2023. They would have been second to last in the league in percentage of. But those numbers are 30% for Sam Darnold and 42% for the three-headed monster that was the Vikings quarterback group in 2023. Like, that is such a far cry from the 4%, or I guess 6% of dropbacks, because one dropback was under 2.5 seconds. That wasn't a pass attempt. That was the unblocked sack from Zach Harrison that turned into a fumble. So I'm imagining that one also wouldn't have been under 2.5 seconds had McCarthy had a clean pocket or something like that. So that's unacceptable. His time to throw was 3.31 seconds. 3.31, which is even higher than the pre-review number, which was like 3.21, which is what I wrote in my article. So 3.31 seconds was slower than any other quarterback throughout the entirety of the 2024 season over a full season sample. So I'm sure some of these quarterbacks in individual games, they had more than that, but this would have been over the course of a year, the slowest any quarterback got rid of the ball. Particularly damning was that he got rid of the ball when blitzed in 3.17 seconds. None of the slowest quarterbacks in the NFL last year averaged a time to throw slower than that on non-blitzes, and only 3 averaged slower on blitzes. And the reason that that's important is because you want to get rid of the ball quicker on blitzes for, I think, obvious reasons, which is that, the pressure is arriving faster, it's arriving sooner. There's a higher likelihood that someone's going to be unblocked, but also a slightly less obvious reason, which is that when they have one fewer player in coverage, you should be able to find that player much, much sooner and get the ball to them. In particular, a lot of offenses, not every offense in the NFL, which is, I think, a slight misconception, but most offenses have hot reads. So when you have a blitz, especially a blitz from an overhang defender, that's somebody kind of like maybe in the slot or the nickel area, a receiver will adjust their route to get open really quickly and enter the vacated area, right? When you've got a blitzer, the area that they would have been covering is now vacated. It's a receiver's job to get to that area as quickly as possible and then, present how open they are, right? Flash their numbers, turn around, look at the quarterback. The quarterback gets rid of the ball and goes to them. That's what a hot read is. That doesn't happen in every offense. It might not happen in the Vikings offense, but I think it does. Because you have these really quick, open receivers underneath to take advantage of these blitzes, or sometimes on blitzes, you're getting one-on-one man coverage. So you might do a one-step deep throw, which Kirk Cousins actually did a fair amount. Sam Darnold did a decent amount, but like you've got a blitz. That means, you've got one-on-one man coverage. That man coverage might be press. If it's press, that no matter what the play that was in the huddle was called, that receiver is going to run a go route. So as soon as it looks like that receiver is winning on the release, you just throw it deep and hope the receiver catches up to it, right? That's a fast time to throw, even though it's a deep shot. The fact that his time to throw on blitzes in this game was slower than the time to throw on non-blitzes for all but 3 quarterbacks in the NFL last year tells me that this isn't an offensive problem. Now, you could make the argument without access to the All-22, which is up now, but I haven't checked for this specific thing. You could make the argument that, hey, maybe the receivers weren't open on time. I have taken a look at some of the All-22 because I wanted to take a look at drop back depths, given what Matt Freese wrote about J.J. McCarthy in his last piece. And I noted that on those plays that I was looking, when McCarthy gets to the top of his drop, receivers are about to get out of their break. And generally speaking, there is a receiver open, and he's just not moving his eyes to that receiver quickly enough or triggering to throw quickly enough. It's unlikely to me, even without that review, that receivers like Jalen Naylor and Justin Jefferson are not going to be open, right? TJ Hawkinson, I also would have added to that, but he did look like pretty lethargic in the game from what I could see. So, maybe we don't add him to that yet until we get, a couple more, games to suggest one way or the other how he's feeling or how fast he's playing. But yeah, I highly doubt that you never had a receiver open. This is a good Atlanta secondary. This is not about kind of their quality. AJ Terrell is a really good cornerback. I would just expect McCarthy and Naylor to get open more often than not. So yeah, that's, I think, the cause of that pressure. It's also the cause of those sacks. He had a pressure to sack ratio of 37.5%. That is egregiously high. I'll take a look at the pressure to sack ratio now for 2024, so we can get like a good understanding of like what the percentiles are for how often pressures get converted to sacks in the NFL. So the average in the NFL last year was 20%. So this is nearly twice the average. The worst in pressure to sack ratio last year was Will Levis, followed by Deshaun Watson, followed by Caleb Williams. Those 3 all kind of make sense. So, that's an intuitive result. And I think that helps kind of validate the statistic. The highest was 29.6%, followed by 28%, followed by 27.8%. So another 10% on top of that. So in addition to inviting pressure by holding onto the ball, you're allowing those pressures to turn into sacks by either misjudging your own athleticism. A couple of times you tried to scramble out of the pocket and you got chased down, or not feeling or seeing the pressure, getting rid of the ball on time, whatever it is. That is also unacceptable. So high pressure rate, 37%, which is, to me, the watermark for a catastrophic pressure rate is around 40%. Unless both quarterbacks are under a 40% pressure rate, it's really hard to find wins for quarterbacks in individual games, where they're the only one with a pressure rate above 40%. So his pressure rate was really high. Oh, okay. The PFF updated numbers had it at 37%. Now it has it at 53%. So that's egregiously high. And some of that is on the offensive line, but I think a lot of it is on McCarthy, who, at least when he was holding onto the ball, got rid of the ball relatively deep downfield. So that's a problem. He was inaccurate on deep throws, which is a problem when you've got a lot of them in the offense. In this case, there were 4 throws beyond 20 yards. That was almost 1/5 of the throws. You can't be that inaccurate on deep passes. He only completed one of them. And that was the Jefferson one, again, at the end of a half, right? Which I'm not going to say doesn't count, but like feels like it's not sustainable if your 2 best deep throws both occurred in end of half prevent circumstances, right? Inaccurate on deep throws. In this game, also surprisingly inaccurate on short throws. Not a lot of receiver drops. There was one receiver drop. It was Aaron Jones on a screen. I think there were only 2 screens. The other one was to Jordan Mason. But yeah, all around a really poor performance from McCarthy. And I think that accounts for a lot of the offensive problems. There were other problems too, but I think that was most of the offense's problems.
Yeah, it was an ugly performance. It made you, it really made you wistful for Ponder's second year. The way that things had gone out there, and it ended with him getting injured as well, which we will be talking about here in a little bit. But this wasn't just JJ gets a little bit banged up or whatever. This was a game where it seemed like just about everyone was going out with an injury. The injury list this week is going to be mighty.
Not looking forward to the official injury report because the unofficial one was so long. I guess we'll continue to see what's going on with Christian Darrisaw, but we had we had a concussion for Ryan Kelly. I believe we had a concussion for Justin Skule. We had a hamstring for Aaron Jones, right? I think.
Yes.
We had the ankle for JJ. I feel like I'm missing one here. Harrison's supposed to be coming back, but that's not the one I was missing. I'm going to Google it. Vikings injuries. Let's see what the internet has to say. Let it do my job.
Our center.
Yeah, Ryan Kelly has a concussion. Yeah. I mentioned that. God dang. Let's see. Okay, this is just a long Vikings.com piece. Okay, here we go. Will Reggets always comes through on these quick hitters. Aaron Jones, Christian Darrisaw might come back. Ryan Kelly, Andrew Van Ginkel, that's the one, right? So he was in the concussion protocol. He'll probably come back based off of the historical record of people coming back from the concussion protocol, but we don't know. Gabe Murphy was the one I missed. So he went down. It looked like a really serious knee injury. There was some fear of an MCL. It looks like he avoided that, so good for him. Jonathan Renard did have an injury scare in the game, but he did come back after one play, and I think he immediately had his sack or something like that. So he'll be on the injury report, but I anticipate he'll be able to make the next game. And then Jeff Okudah is probably going to return from his concussion protocol. So we got a lot of all of that going on. Blake Cashman still on IR. Jordan Addison suspended still, one more game. But yeah, a lot of players that you're missing that, a month ago you anticipated having, except for maybe Addison.
Well, even before the beginning of the year, we were sitting there like, oh yeah, well this is, they're spending a lot of time and money on this offensive line. We're actually going to have an offensive line this year being able to protect a rookie quarterback. This is going to be great. We're going to have depth at this too. It'll be wonderful.
Yeah, outstanding. And it turns out both the rookie quarterback and the offensive line could not be protected.
No. This was, God, what an absolute mess. And kudos to you if you made it to the end. I couldn't. I think I put it away after.
Professional obligation is a powerful force, James.
Yeah, well, at the 2-minute mark, I missed the muffed punt, apparently, because the game ended with a muffed punt.
Yeah.
So, I live for awful special teams play, and even that couldn't save it.
Well, I mean, I feel like you kind of got your fill of awful special teams play, right? So like I mentioned that the punting was good and the kicking was good. But it turns out there are other elements to special team play, like returning those punts and kicks when they do it. And Miles Price, my guy, be less confident. What are you doing?
You get one of those in the end zone, just leave it there. You're good. Yeah. As long as you have control of it and don't let the other team get it, as we learned this weekend, just make sure you have possession of it and then, down.
Well, I think I mentioned on this podcast, and I definitely mentioned on the Vikings squad show. Again, I didn't name it. That I was worried that he was going to fumble on a return. And that is technically not what happened. He muffed it. That's a little bit different. But I was just not confident in the security of possession when he was returning. And it turns out that was fair. That wasn't me having a crystal ball or going through all of his college film or anything like that and, evaluating that with a fine-tooth comb and being like, well, he didn't technically fumble in college, but, the way that he's carrying the ball, like which I've done that before, right? Where I've talked about the way a player carries the ball is going to lead to fumbles. And even though they didn't have a ton before, suddenly they start doing it. That happens, right? But in this case, it was just watching him in the preseason. That's all the scouting I needed to do. And I was pretty worried. And it turns out that was a fair worry. But even if you exclude the ball security concern about the muffed punt, on punts, he averaged 2.0 yards per punt return. It seemed like he was putting the Vikings in more danger by attempting to return it instead of fair catching it or allowing it to bounce in the off chance that I don't know that either of the ones that he could have not fair caught would have rolled into the end zone. But still, either fair catch it or don't catch it, right? And he chose to catch and return. He got 2.0 yards and exposed the Vikings to a little bit of risk from that. And then the average field position on opposing kickoffs was the second worst mark of the season so far. It's only a 2-week season, right? But returning to an average of the 21.8 yard line or something like that was the worst. Only the Houston Texans were worse, and that was in week 1. And that was the 20.8 yard line. Remember, if the ball rolls into the end zone and it's a touchback, that brings you to the 20. And if it goes into the end zone or out the back of the end zone, that brings it to the 35, right? And so that's the calculus by which you should be looking at these returns. And for him to lose on even so there were I want to say 3 returns that occurred inside what's called the landing zone, where if you don't return it, and it's a touchback that brings it to the 20. So if we only look at the 3 that seem to be in the end zone, and maybe it was only 2, but I thought it was 3. And you think about it in terms of is this going to be better than getting the ball at the 35-yard line? Oh no, it's 10 yards worse. That's a whole down series. That's nearly catastrophically bad. You cannot have the worst kick return game in the NFL. I mentioned at the beginning of the season that I thought that special teams units are going to be really important and that individual special teamers may not be as important. Sounds like maybe I'm wrong about this if I'm blaming Miles Price for a lot of this. But I did also mention that I think that there's going to be a significant difference between the best teams and the worst teams at special teams play. And it's going to result in much more meaningful field position distinctions and therefore offensive distinctions as a product of it. Than we've seen in at least a decade, if not ever, because of how much variance and volatility this produces. Well, the key to that is that you aren't the one at the bottom, and the Vikings are at a huge risk of that. So that was a huge special teams concern. I know that we were just talking about the offense, but I thought it was kind of worth discussing because what in the world?
So, the defense was not terrible, but we were able to be run through often.
Yeah, and again, I think that's not necessarily the risk that you take. If you don't miss tackles, you're in a good spot, right? But the thing is, the Vikings finished with the 10th best EPA per play of the week defensively. So it was worth it. not like only allowing 15 points until like the very end of the game, I think that you're in a pretty good spot. But like, yeah, I think that the Vikings need to find a way to like get better at having the kind of mutual understanding of where players need to go on running plays. I think that the run fits were missed. And it's not just that, you have players going in the wrong gap. That doesn't happen that often, but players slow to kind of hitting their landmarks, which will allow a guard, for example, to climb up into the second level and wall off a linebacker that normally would be getting a tackle, at the 2-yard line instead of the 7-yard line. Like that might be the difference there, and how quickly you react to that is important. I think that might be one of the elements that they're missing from Blake Cashman, right? Which, like, it shouldn't be a shock. Like, hey, one of the best players in the defense is gone, and now the defense is worse in this area. Yeah. But like Cashman, I think, has done more for the Vikings as a coverage defender. And knowing that, you can kind of maybe forget that, like, also he's like an extremely good run defender, and not having him is going to have consequences. And that's exactly what happened here. You want it to be cleaned up. He's not going to be back for another 2 games at least. But yeah, the run defense wasn't spectacular, but on the whole, altogether, I think that you would take that. Ideally, what happens is that the Vikings on offense convert a couple of extra third downs, and that reduces the number of possessions the Falcons have by 1 or maybe even 2 as a product of that. And then that final possession being a touchdown doesn't matter because it doesn't happen. So I thought the defense played well enough to win the game.
So there's a couple points I want to hit on, but the first thing I want to mention is we had a mailbag question that came in. I didn't write the name down of it, but it was a question on the defensive sub rules. It said, can you explain the defensive sub rules to me like I'm 5, please? What is the definition of, quote, a reasonable amount of time to allow the defense to change personnel? Because at one point, we ended up getting a penalty based on the fact that we weren't able to snap the ball because of the defensive subs. So what exactly happened, and is this Kevin O'Connell's fault?
Yeah, so the rule is that the offense, if they make a substitution, the defense is allowed a reasonable amount of time. And the way that that's enforced is that the umpire stands over the ball until the referee, and these are 2 different officials, all of them have like their own, like the side judge and stuff like that. So the umpire stands over the ball. The referee will then deem that the defense has had a reasonable time to complete his substitutions. And then the umpire will stop standing over the ball, and you can hike the ball at any time after the whistle blows and the referee moves. So why and to what degree? Well, there's something called substitution deception that they've been like combating. And the pioneers of substitution deception in the modern era will not surprise you. It's the Patriots. They've done it in a number of ways through a number of attempts, including ones that are just like actually just straight up against the rules as opposed to loopholes. Like a lot of times they'll do the loophole stuff and everyone gets mad. But sometimes, like with the substitution stuff, they will just not do the rules, which is amazing. But, and this is the Belichick Patriots. Who knows what the variable Patriots get up to? But I presumably like Patriots fans, but I don't know. But yeah, so this came up when the Patriots deployed an unusual formation where they only had 4 offensive linemen on the field, and then their 5th ineligible was, I believe, a wide receiver. And so the wide receiver had to declare as ineligible. We're used to players declaring as eligible. What happens the other way around too, especially in the era where like the number that you're wearing is really important, back in like 2016. So the wide receiver was not wearing an ineligible number, and so had to declare as ineligible, just like an ineligible number has to declare as eligible on those plays. It's based off of what number you wear and so on. So they had 4 offensive linemen and a receiver who had declared ineligible. And the Patriots wanted to snap the ball as quickly as possible to prevent the Ravens, who they were playing in that game, from like understanding what was going on and being confused about their defensive assignments and so on. And I believe John Harbaugh ran onto the field, and that caused an unsportsmanlike penalty, but he also wanted a timeout. And so whatever, right? The Patriots tried to snap the ball as quickly as possible, and the ref wasn't letting them do that. That brought up a discussion about how long is reasonable. Well, it kind of depends on what the offense is doing. So one of the other times the Patriots tried to do this, I think it was against the Broncos, is they brought their punt unit onto the field, and then they ran the punt unit off and brought the offense on at a particular point in the play clock, and then they tried to snap the ball as quickly as possible, and the refs were like, "Are you kidding me? No, you can't." That's the one I'm referencing. That's like that's just against the rules. And hey, Justin Herbert run. And we're recording this during the second Monday Night Football game for people who are unaware. And so they, in that situation, the refs did allow the defense a little bit longer than they typically do to get those substitutions in. Now, that kind of invites the question, how long do they typically do it? It depends, but I think like 10 seconds is around the time, and at least one former official has said this to a reporter. 10 seconds is around the time that you give a defense time to do that, which means that you have to be very clear about how quickly you're moving and how early you substitute on offense. But if it's just one player, it will be less than 10 seconds. And if the defense looks like it is taking advantage of that time and not making an effort, if they're not like jogging over or something like that, then the referee won't give them that time. Like the amount of effort you show will also play a role. So the number of players you substitute, maybe even the players that you substitute, and the situation that you're in will kind of dictate what's reasonable. But the referee ultimately has judgment. So it could be as quick as 8 seconds or as slow as 12, but it's typically around 10 from my understanding. And so if you're playing games where you are trying to substitute kind of late in the clock, you got to be real sure that you're giving the defense enough time. So you do it with like, as soon as the mic cuts off, 15 seconds left on the play clock, and you do that and you get that substitution off the field and you get your guy back on the field that you want to substitute it in. The umpire will stand over the ball until there's 5 seconds left on the play clock, generally speaking. And then hopefully you don't have to make any adjustments at the line of scrimmage, because it usually takes, or there's no motion or shift, because it usually takes 3-4 seconds to do that. And now you're not playing with any time, and now you've got to snap the ball before people are ready. So it does limit your flexibility when you do that.
So it's frustrating to watch to just sit there. But was this necessarily was this Kevin O'Connell's fault, or how exactly does this work?
At like a broad level, like yes, right? Like it's the head coach's fault because you got to get your team prepared. At the specific level, like at the what happened on that play, did Kevin O'Connell make like a reasonable effort to figure out what happened? My understanding is that typically speaking, when something like that happens, a player messed up, right? You have another player entering the huddle, or a player heard the wrong person. So sometimes they'll shout out the personnel grouping on the sideline, and they won't say like 11, 12, 13. They'll say like Tiger or whatever, and every player kind of knows what that's supposed to mean and who's up and who's down, right? So if you're in 11 personnel, there could be one name for 11 personnel where it's TJ Hawkinson is the tight end, and another name where it's Josh Oliver, right? So it could be Tiger and Panther, could be the two types of 11 personnel, and you just have to remember who's who. Well, if one of them gets hurt, one player has to understand that they're up, right? Which means that they replace, let's say it's Hawkinson who gets hurt, they replace Hawkinson in every instance where, his number is called or his personnel formation is called. And it's on them to figure that out. So what typically happens on Saturdays and sometimes Fridays is that coaches will quiz players. Hey, these two players are down. Who's up? Who's down? Or who's up? Right. And the players have to immediately raise their hands or stand up to signal that they're up. Right. And so they have to be the ones to kind of be aware of what's happening in the game and stuff like that when players go down. And then obviously coaches will confer with players throughout the game to kind of remind them or, say, hey, there's a change in plans. We wanted you to kind of take Hawkinson snaps, but we think we're going to get a lot of good looks if it's actually Josh Oliver in there. So actually you will be the Josh Oliver role, and Josh Oliver will be playing the Hawkinson role from a personnel perspective. Or something like that. They'll be in communication to make sure that happens. But for the most part, the individual mess up will be some player who didn't hear the thing that correctly or wasn't paying enough attention to kind of how things have changed because of an injury. And it's not because the coach called it in too late. That said, and again, going back to the one episode of Quarterback I watched where Kirk Cousins fumbled because the motion was too confusing. And so he had signaled for the motion before he signaled for the timing of the snap instead of vice versa. And that caused a fumble. And that playbook, the Arthur Smith Falcons playbook, had so many motions and shifts in it. It was really difficult to keep everything straight. And Cousins was confident that they were going to mess up because of how much they had to keep track of in the pre-snap movement game. And that's exactly what happened. Similarly, if you're doing this all the time, you're increasing the likelihood of the odds that something like that is going to happen. And the Vikings go late into the play clock a lot of the time, and it invites those kinds of errors. And so you need to coach your team so that it has a much smaller margin for error in those situations. So ultimately, it is on the coach, even though individually these mistakes can be attributed to a player here or there. If you don't discipline the process for the team, then you are going to create more mistakes where more individual players will be at fault.
So looking at this from a coaching perspective, you are trying to do long developing plays for your rookie quarterback when he is being sacked, 60%, or when he's being rushed and blitzed 60% of the time?
Well, so he's under pressure 53% of the time. I believe he's blitzed like some 40% of the time.
Yeah, just an absurd amount for this game. At what point as a coach do you switch gears and go, okay, we need dump offs. We cannot do the long developing plays, especially because he does not appear to have any accuracy at the moment.
I mean, like, there's two competing things at play here. One is that if you're in a game where you're behind, right? So by the time you understand, like, oh, the offense that we designed is not working, you might also be understanding it's the fourth quarter and you're 2 scores down. Well, you don't really have the option to have a shorter passing game. You need to take chances in order to get back in. And in fact, that's how you got back in against Chicago, is by taking those chances and having those deep shots. So ideally, you kind of realize it earlier, but McCarthy only threw 21 passes. Now you had 30 dropbacks, so it's not the same. You had a couple of scrambles, and of course, the 6 sacks. So, but like, you had 30 dropbacks. So how quickly do you realize? Because you don't want to like panic after 5 throws and change your approach. So is it after 7? Is it after 8? Is it after 9? When do you realize that the offense isn't working, as opposed to we're right now being subject to a small amount of variance? Once you do that and you want to kind of adjust and call the game a little bit better, you better hope that your pre-game planning included install for some of the plays that you want to run that are shorter. If it didn't, you can still call them. That's why you have the plays on the quarterback bracelet, right? But I think that for the most part, you might be in a spot where you're kind of limited in offense. It's very similar to like when an offense is stagnant. This was like a big deal in like the 2010s. But when an offense was stagnant, sometimes they would go into no huddle. Now it doesn't seem like that's as much of a trend, but they would go into no huddle, and then a lot of times that would work, and then they'd stop, being in no huddle, or they would have to do it every single game, and fans would ask like, "Why'd you stop?" or "Why aren't you just always in no huddle?" And the answer is because you have a very limited playbook in no huddle, and it has to be limited because when you're not huddling, you have to communicate a very large amount of information very quickly, very clearly at the line of scrimmage. So you basically only have one word, and each word has to sound very distinct and different, right? You can't have one play be called limbo and the other play be called disco, right? Like, that's going to screw somebody up. Because of that, very often teams would only have 6, maybe 8 no huddle plays, and you can't run an offense out of that. Similarly, if you enter into a game without a ton of short yardage in the game plan, you might be limiting your offense. That said, that's not me justifying the fact that they were full bore the whole game. That's more me trying to explain, like, maybe this was one potential thought process that they went through. And if so, we understand it now. we also understand it was probably an incorrect conclusion based off of that thought process. Like, hey, we may be limiting our playbook, but what is more limiting to our playbook is the fact that we can't hit a deep shot to save our lives. So of the two things that are limiting our playbook, I'm going to go with the one that's going to have a couple of completions attached to it. So you probably have to decide at some point in the middle of the second quarter. And again, that could be tough because by the time you have enough throws to figure that out, you could be in the 2-minute drill for the end of the half, right? Like if they have like a 7-minute drive in the middle of the second quarter, like now what, right? So that's the kind of scenario you're in. Yeah. So it's tough, but like that's the job of a head coach or an offensive coordinator is like to answer these tough questions.
Yeah, but if we were going to be in a situation where we needed to take chances and potentially needed to trust our quarterback, why the hell did we punt in the fourth quarter like that?
Oh, that was just cowardice.
Surrender Index has that as the most cowardly punt of the year so far.
Most? I thought it was like 93rd. Well, yeah, that makes sense. 90th percentile since like 1999. And punts are getting less cowardly. So like that all tracks. Yeah, so he explained that they didn't convert a fourth down earlier in the game, and that's why they didn't do that one. And that's garbage. It's a bad argument.
They shouldn't have tried to convert the fourth down to start the game.
I mean, I'm fine that they tried that. It's just like you can't use a bumbled snap as an excuse for why you're not going to run any play at all. Like run the plays that don't have that as a risk. Don't run a quarterback sneak that you're obviously bad at it. Run up the gut. I don't care. Like just do something. Especially if you're going to do a 3rd and 1 deep shot, right? Like a 3rd and 1 deep shot, I'm kind of always in favor of if you're not doing it all the time. But like I'm especially in favor of if your plan is to go for it on 4th down if you don't get it. That's just like not how that works. Like I don't know how else to explain it. There's going to be a lot of things you do during a football game that are not going to work, and you never don't do them because of that. Like, it turns out throwing a short out results in a pick 6. Better not do that again. And then you do it again, and there's another pick by Billy Bowman this time. Are you going to stop throwing short outs? No. Just because it didn't work 2 times? That's crazy. You would never think like that. So why would you do that for one play on 4th down when it's really high leverage? Like I get like the logic of punting in general is that you punt the ball, you pin it deep, hopefully. Again, Ryan Wright's your punter, so it's not like we're working with like a weapon of a punter here. But then the defense has been playing well, so you force them to give up the ball maybe in a minute and a half, and you get the ball back in better field position because for some reason you think your punter is better than theirs or something. I don't know. But yeah, like I get it. It's 9.5 minutes left, and you're down 2 scores. So all you have to do is make sure they don't score. And most of their scores at that point had occurred when they were already in your territory. You don't want to give them another one of those opportunities. But like I say all the time in this podcast, losing by a little and losing by a lot are not really that different. If you go for it on 4th down and fail, you will lose by a lot. If you punt, you will probably lose by a little. The only chance of success you have is, I think, going for it on 4th down and succeeding. Not obviously the only chance. You could get that stop in a minute and a half, but like that's your best shot. And I think it was just a really shockingly non-probabilistic decision from a coach that very often speaks in terms that are comfortable with analytical decision-making. I want to be, I guess, precise in my language here because I don't know that he's an analytics guy or anything like that, but he is very familiar with the findings that we get from data studies into NFL strategy and often acts in concert with it or even speaks directly to those findings. So that was a shocking decision. I did not understand it. And the Vikings lost. So, and it was like it was a -3% win probability decision, right? And there were 10 other plays the Vikings made in that game Like, I think actually exactly 10 other plays the Vikings made in that game that from a win probability perspective were worse, right? But at least all of those had a chance of improving your win probability. This was a choice to sacrifice it. Like that's the difference there. It's like it's 3rd and short. This is actually what happened to the Falcons. They lost the exact same amount of win probability when they ran it on 3rd and short and got -1 yards. Like it's like the Vikings intentionally ran for a loss on 3rd down. That's what that was like. So I don't understand that.
Yeah, it's a little hard to defend. It's not great. I think we have spent more time talking about this game than I enjoyed than the period of time that I enjoyed watching the game. So we should move on.
Great.
And it looks like JJ McCarthy's ankle is going to be an issue for the next couple of weeks. Correct me if I'm wrong because I can't read.
It's Max Brosmer. Or you pronounce it Brosmer.
Oh no! He's not the person who's potentially starting next week, though. Who's the potential starter?
Are you sure? I was told he was the best backup on the roster, so I don't know what you're talking about. But
well, regardless, he's currently the with JJ starting. He's the number 3 back. Who's the number 2 quarterback?
A back. So Xavier Scott's the number 3 running back. The number 2 running back is ostensibly Jordan Mason.
Wentz,
and when Aaron Jones out, we're probably going to see Xavier Scott
for the Vikings for the Bengals game. It's going to be a backup versus a backup. It looks like Carson Wentz versus Jake Browning. Boy, you've mentioned before about the bits just have a history of just like manifesting themselves. I did not have this one on my bingo card for this year.
At least this early in the season, right? Like it felt like when they signed him that it was just going to happen, that he was going to have to play and just going to have to deal with that. Week 3 is crazy. That's so fast. He's been on the team for 3 weeks, right? Like he showed up right before week 1. He doesn't. So he did meet with the Vikings during the summer. It is technically possible he had the playbook before then. I doubt it because they're all on team iPads that are tightly controlled, and you wouldn't just give that to like a free agent for no reason. But yeah, it felt like it was going to happen as soon as he was signed. Which allows me to blame the Vikings for the JJ McCarthy injury. They caused it by signing Carson Wentz. Clearly. And by virtue of the strength of the bits that propelled Wentz into a starting position, which happened most efficiently via an injury.
That's one way to put it. Boy, I'm trying to think of a quarterback outside of Josh Dobbs who has started so quickly after signing with the Vikings. Josh Freeman? Is that the only person
Josh Freeman
we can point to?
Holy crap. I mean, so Josh Freeman is the second fastest I can remember after Josh Dobbs. But remember, Sam Bradford, I believe, was only in the building for 2 weeks because week 1, Sean Hill was the starter, right? So week 2, and they traded for him like right before, like a week before week 1. So he had 2 weeks. Yeah. I want to say with the offense. So that's like kind of where we're at. But yeah, Dobbs and Freeman. Well, Dobbs had a fun little, like that was nice. Freeman not maybe as much. I would say
that was the opposite. That was the opposite of nice.
Yeah, maybe that's the way I would put that.
A waking nightmare of a game that is still talked about.
We talk about it all the time still because it's so comical and so bad. And both teams were trying to lose. And like one of those quarterbacks has a reasonable shot of getting into the Hall of Fame, which is so stupid.
Eventually is just going to guilt his way into it. Like just enough Manning casts are going to happen. We're like,
it's like enough Manning casts, enough doofy commercials where he does some like really idiotic stuff, and everyone's like, well, his face is nice, so. Like, yeah.
So Carson Wentz is potentially the Vikings starter for the next couple of weeks, which includes Arif's trip over to Ireland.
Yeah,
so if JJ McCarthy needs to sit out for his ankle for a couple of weeks, you could be traveling to Ireland to see Carson Wentz be the quarterback of the Vikings.
Seems appropriate that an oversized leprechaun would be the quarterback for the Ireland game. God damn. I mean, I guess he looks more like Prince Harry, but like, come on, it's like a ginger, right? Like that's you have to at least note it, right? Okay. So, Carson Wentz. I have explained on this podcast several times where the bit comes from. You can just listen to the episode from when he was signed to get an explanation on that.
Couple of weeks ago.
Yeah, for a couple of weeks ago. On the podcast, I gave a little bit of a more objective scouting report on him than like the bit would demand, right? Since then, Matt Freese wrote a scouting report on Carson Wentz, and I'm happy to say that we align in a lot of ways on the Carson Wentz scouting report. What's interesting is that a lot of the problems specifically that McCarthy is having are also problems that Wentz has had over the past couple of seasons, like ever since the 2017 season. And that includes a 2021 season where many Vikings fans helpfully pointed out that the Colts were, I believe, 10th in points scored that year, 451 points. And they were, quote, half a game. This is a tweet I got today. Half a game away from the playoffs. Now, why did they not make the playoffs? How did they lose the game that would have been their playoff berth game? What's interesting, because by around quarter 3, you wouldn't have imagined it was even possible for them to lose that game. And yet, the universe provided. So Wentz is a pretty interesting quarterback because of the way he's been characterized, has been as a wickedly smart, both pre and post snap quarterback that has all of the tools that you need to be successful in the NFL and then some. So a really good athlete, one would say even like tight end type athleticism, really strong arm, and kind of willing to take on pressure, take on hits, and throw through contact in order to get what he needs done, right? So you've got an ostensibly smart quarterback that has, a lot of the intangibles that you want. Well, he is missing a couple of things, and it seems more evident in the more recent tape, including the Colts tape, than in the 2017 Eagles tape. And I think the injury did have a big impact on him, but I think it also was a case where he kind of reverted to form. So in 2017, as the weeks were going on before he got hurt, he was getting rid of the ball more and more on time. So early on in 2017, I would argue that a lot of his outstanding success was kind of helped by luck. I think that, like, I remember a play, God, I forgot he was throwing to like Greg Ward and stuff, like in Hightower. Geez, not the most stellar receiving core on the planet, admittedly. But he's throwing deep downfield. I think it's deep down the left sideline. I want to say it's like week 1 or 2. I want to say week 2. And the ball hits the cornerback in the helmet, bounces off his helmet, I think twice as he's moving, and into the receiver's hands. And it gets charted as like a 60-yard completion. And it was week 2, and I was like, I'm in for an awful season. And I was right. I was in for an awful season. Not as bad as his, it turns out, but he was on an MVP tear, won MVP votes despite not being available for the last couple of games, and pushing the Eagles into the playoffs. So since then, the habits that he showed in 2016 as a rookie, holding onto the ball too long and inviting pressure, was a huge problem that he had. He has since had that problem in the NFL. In fact, I should just pull up his PFF stuff so I can kind of quantify this. But he would invite pressure, be late to throws, not operate within the design of the offense, and he would be relatively inaccurate for as big as his arm was, for as good as he was at like rifling the ball downfield, which is not something he was doing in 21, 22, or 23. As good as, or 24, right? So he had like 24 attempts in 23, 19 attempts in 24. You add that to the 300 or so attempts he had for Washington, the 500 or so attempts for Indianapolis. You get kind of an understanding of what quarterback he turned into, right? So his time to throw in under pressure increased from the moment of injury. So while his time to throw, I think generally was a little bit faster by by the raw numbers, in terms of under pressure time to throw in like 23 or in 2018, 2017, that increased. And you can't have that. If you're inviting that kind of pressure, you're creating the very sacks that you're trying to avoid. And so the amount of sacks that he created, magnified over time. He lost his accuracy, or I should say he never super had it. And his anticipation wasn't there. So there's a lot of ways that we define anticipation. I talked about this again a couple of weeks ago. And there's a lot of things that you can characterize correctly as anticipation colloquially, right? It would fit like the English word anticipation. But in the context of like quarterback evaluation, what it typically tends to mean is beginning your throwing motion or beginning your throw before the targeted receiver has gotten into or even out of their break. And so the level of anticipation you're talking about might be kind of at what point in the break that you're getting rid of the ball. But you're throwing it before the receiver is open, and typically you're throwing it within the context of the time where the receiver isn't even at the part of their route that will push them in the direction they're supposed to go. Now, obviously, on like routes like 9 routes where you're just going straight downfield or whatever, that like is not a thing that super exists, and so anticipation is not really kind of a quality that you're identifying in the same way. But that's what anticipation typically means, and he didn't, I think, ever showcase that. He showcased the ability to throw the ball ahead of the receiver, which is a skill that you need to have, but it is, I think, correctly in English called anticipation, but not what we talk about when we talk about quarterback anticipation. So he wasn't doing that. He was like a see it, throw it passer. And that magnified again in Indianapolis and especially in Washington. He also has, just like McCarthy, a really long throwing motion. And I believe that's just a product of the fact that his mechanics weren't ever fixed, just like with McCarthy. He has longer arms than McCarthy too, and so it's like really exaggerated looking. But what that means is that defenders have the ability to break on that ball and react to the ball before it gets out. And these microseconds kind of define a lot of success or failure for quarterbacks. Now, a lot of quarterbacks who have extended throwing motions make up for it with their arm strength. And Wentz did that in 2017 for sure. But it's really like playing with fire. If you don't kind of get all of these margins down. So because of that, Wentz had really low accuracy just in terms of getting the balls to receivers on time or getting the ball to a receiver's hands. So when you account for like drops and depth of throw and all of that, his completion percentage over expected was really, really low. And he wasn't very aggressive. So 2017, if you remember that season, there were a lot of like really great deep throws, especially in the second half of his season. And that, that's nice, right? And he was an aggressive quarterback in 2016 as well. But generally speaking, he had a 10.3 depth of target. Average depth of target downfield was 10.3 yards past the line of scrimmage in 2017. He never crossed 9.5 in any other season. So 8.0, 8.5, 9.4, which is relatively deep. That was 2020 Philadelphia. Then 8.4 and then 7.9. And then with the Chiefs and the Rams, 6.7, 5.2. So his career depth of target is 8.6. So this is a guy that is not hunting for explosives in the way that you might imagine a person with his profile to hunt for explosives. And the problem here is not, he's not throwing it deep. Like, hey, Mahomes hasn't been throwing it deep for like 3 years. And aside from what we've seen so far this year, it's been working, right? We've seen a bunch of quarterbacks play successfully with it. Jalen Hurts is a really good example of that. But the difference is the ball is hitting the receiver in the hands, right? So when that's not happening consistently, like in 2020 in Philadelphia, 2021 in Indianapolis, you've got a low accuracy rate and you're not generating explosives to make up for it, the offense is just going to be behind. At the same time, his turnover-worthy play rate has been relatively high. His interception total has been somewhat low, aside from his first year and his last year in Philadelphia. But the rate at which he was either giving up the ball on fumbles or putting the ball into defenders' hands, whether or not they caught it, that was really alarmingly high. So we're at a spot where Carson Wentz is a bigger veteran version of kind of the problems that McCarthy had, except he's 33. He's 32. He'll turn 33 this year. It's baked in the cake. McCarthy, you think, like, hey, we might be able to fix this. Will it be fixed with practice or on-field reps? That's a different discussion. It doesn't mean you have to start McCarthy or whatever, but these are the same problems. And so given the problems that the Vikings have on the offensive line, given the problems that come with a quarterback unfamiliar with the offense because he's only been here for 3 weeks, I'm pretty concerned. That said, like, obviously a bunch of people want to know what's going to happen if Carson Wentz plays well. Like, what is my reaction given like the bit, right? And I think it's kind of embedded. Like, so when I wrote the post-game piece on the Vikings, which was primarily like, it broke down the game, right? Talked a lot about JJ McCarthy, it talked about the offensive line, it talked about the defense, all that. It broke down the game, but it primarily was a criticism of the way the Vikings approach this offseason. They have built a roster and a contract environment, a cap environment that really wants to win now. It's the oldest defense in the league. Their 2026 and 2027 cap liabilities are extraordinarily high. So it's really difficult for them to extend young players or bring in young players on long-term extensions. So the window is basically now, and a lot of the players that you're going to want aren't going to be there. So like Ryan Kelly might be gone, Andrew Van Ginkel might be gone, Harrison Smith might be gone. A lot of the players that are a big part of this year's team, in theory, just might be gone. So it's a win now roster more than most rosters in the NFL. And they did it with a rookie quarterback, essentially a rookie, a second-year player, but essentially a rookie quarterback. And unless you are super confident based off of the year, and we were willing to give the Vikings the benefit of the doubt, like, hey, you've been in all of the meetings with this guy, you've seen him practice in the spring, you made a conscious decision to move on from Sam Darnold, who we keep on saying is a 14-3 quarterback, but maybe that's unfair to characterize him that way because he didn't play as well as a 14-3 quarterback typically would, right? He didn't play at like a 2011 Rodgers level or a 2007 Brady level or a 2015 Manning level, fine. But you had really good quarterback play and you let it go. So we're going to give you the benefit of the doubt. We're going to assume that this guy can kind of hit the ground running. Well, he can't. If Carson Wentz can, with this roster, like, unfortunately for the bit and for my mental health, like, you got to stick with him, right? Like, you might have to Wally Pip JJ McCarthy. But I am very hesitant about that possibility because I think they replicate a lot of the problems with each other. Not getting rid of the ball on time, inviting pressure. They're both injury prone, it seems like. Not being familiar with the offense. Being relatively inaccurate for the depth of throw that they have. Being a little bit interception prone, especially in the intermediate area of the field. Being inaccurate on deep throws. Like, there's a very similar weakness profile. The one thing is that the operation might run smoother because he's a veteran. So you might not have like the delay of game penalties, or we're not shifting correctly with 3 seconds left on the clock. So that might be kind of the area where you'll see an improvement, which I'm loath to admit, right? I don't want to be there, but that might be kind of the situation that you're in, is very similar problems.
It'll make for an interesting train wreck. And at this point, I'll take interesting over what happened on Sunday night.
Sure. That was a slog. That sucked.
That was not good. Let's hit the mailbag. Let's burn through some of these. Raul asks, for Arif's parenting corner, how relatable was JJ's back to work performance after a newborn? My wife and I are on the fence about having a third child. What should we consider when making this decision?
Well, do you have a game next week?
If so, maybe not.
Yeah. Okay, so look at your calendar, and if 9 months from now, which, hey, McCarthy, I understand that 9 months ago might have been New Year's, but Bud, you were going to be the starting quarterback. Come on. But check your calendar 9 months from now, and if you're not in likely to be in a high pressure, no paternity leave environment, then don't do it. But otherwise, hey, have a kid, whatever, man. Wait, no. He lives in Carmel, Indiana, right?
Yes.
Don't. No, we don't need more people from Carmel.
No, I've been on the record saying the kids are a Ponzi scheme, and I stand by this statement.
Having raised like 17 of them, you would understand.
I'd understand better than most. Matt D asks, how do I keep my sanity for the next 16 weeks? I tried screaming into the void, but it echoed back, you could have had Bo Nix.
That's a mean void. That's rough. I'd suggest void shopping, but that's not really a possibility for most people. So I would say just embrace the fact that you're not going to be sane. Yeah.
Just embrace the chaos. Kenneth Allen asks, how long does a team usually need to evaluate a young quarterback? Assuming now that this year is less about competing and more about development, when will JJ have enough playing time to determine whether he's the guy moving forward? If he plays the whole season, will they know by the end?
So it had been kind of like a small trend in early public football analytics. By early, I mean like, mid 2000s, not like 1973 when, they invented EPA. Former quarterback Virgil Carter, I believe, did that. But yeah, when there were a lot of discussions, I want to say Doug Drinan over at the Pro Football Reference blog, and Chase Stewart, who's now at Football Perspective, and Brian Burke, who ran AdvancedFootballStats.com, which became AdvancedFootballAnalytics.com, and then ESPN hired him to be the director of ESPN Stats and Info. When they were all kind of like writing and getting big in kind of the early football analysis by number scene, that was one of the questions that a lot of them tried to answer, in addition to everybody coming up with their own better version of like passer rating. And the conclusion that was drawn from them was different than the conclusion that had been drawn from like when reporters would ask a similar question to coaches around the league or former coaches. So a lot of them would say something like, you need 1,000 throws, you need 1,000, passing attempts before you can make a decision. It turns out that's a lot. That's so many. But it does kind of, I just saw some of them said 1,500. It does kind of match up with, in a modern league environment, 2 seasons. Back then, it was like kind of 3 seasons is what that would mean. Yeah, and most of the conclusions that were drawn by those guys was about 1.5 seasons or 2 seasons. So it did kind of match up a little bit, but they were closer to 700 attempts than 1,000. But like one thing that we kind of learned is that there were a decent amount of exceptions to this rule. So for example, Donovan McNabb wasn't very good until, at least as a passer, until his 3rd or 4th year in the league. And then obviously the broadcast, came up with a bunch of examples, like, Troy Aikman's the one everyone brings up. Terry Bradshaw is a good drop for this one. Terry Bradshaw, by the way, so like obviously his career numbers are awful for a Hall of Fame quarterback, but like he actually does have a pretty reasonable argument for it. I don't think it's appropriate to hold the worst years of a player against them when it comes to Hall of Fame consideration. And so if you only look at his like 8 best years, which I think is a reasonable thing to do, his numbers are outstanding. And it's just because his first 2 years were so abysmally bad. He almost didn't show up to training camp his 3rd year because he thought he was just going to get cut. And when he was informed he was still the starter, he was flabbergasted. Like, a crazy situation. It's not like that anymore. But, obviously Josh Allen is kind of the modern example of somebody who struggled a lot very early on. And I think it's fair for us to be like, hey, we can't index every quarterback to Josh Allen. But what's interesting is that I think as more time has gone on, the more we realized it really is much more situational than I think we originally thought. So Josh Rosen got 1 year, and a team traded for him, and they were like, you know what? Arizona was right. This guy stinks. Josh Allen got 3 years. Some quarterbacks get a cut, like Drew Brees, took a while, and then they didn't like him, and so they drafted Phillip Rivers, and then he goes over to decide between the Dolphins and the Saints, and he chooses the Saints, right? And then it takes a while, but he gets good there, right? I guess they chose Eli Manning and then ended up with Rivers. Anyway, there are some quarterbacks where you kind of like figure this out after a year, and it's not even like a matter of degree. So the two worst rookie seasons that we've seen in recent history from quarterbacks that I can remember anyway, there might have been others that have happened since then, but I remember being flabbergasted, aside from Josh Allen, I should say, flabbergasted at how bad the rookie seasons for Jared Goff actually it might have been Josh Allen's the one I was thinking of, but like Jared Goff's rookie season was atrocious. It was one of the worst we've seen by the numbers, right? By adjusted net yards per attempt, by PFF grade, whatever, right? And Carson Wentz's rookie season actually is another good example of one that was poor. Not nearly as dramatically bad as Goff's, right? But we know how those two careers panned out. Wentz obviously, turned it around his second year and had a near MVP season. And Goff has been on multiple teams that have been the favorite to win their conference and has been to a Super Bowl, right? As a player, not as a backup. It's different for every quarterback. Like Goff, you needed to give like 3 years and a new coach. Rosen, you kind of knew right away. Mac Jones, he had a decent rookie year actually, but you knew at the end of his second year. Like it's just different for everybody. But if you wanted like a broad average that you just know is going to have a lot of outliers, the answer is 2 years. So at the end of the season, we're not going to have. And that's 2 years of like starting of like attempts. So at the end of the season, we are probably not going to have enough information. But if the information we have is he's too slow at processing, right? And this isn't like smart, dumb, right? This is just, are your eyes moving quickly and identifying the information that you need to see as fast as possible on a football field. If he doesn't have it, he doesn't have it, right? Whereas Goff did have that, right? He had the fundamental capabilities you need in a quarterback. It sounded like Josh Rosen had neither that nor the work ethic. It sounded like Johnny Manziel had the eyes, but not the work ethic, right? So, the only reason that Johnny, I think, started his second year is because of how productive that first year was. But my understanding is that the Browns coaching staff was like not enamored by the fact that they felt kind of forced into that decision. Lo and behold. Why is the quarterback struggling might be a better answer to that question than how many dropbacks do we need to give a good statistical analysis of how good that quarterback is. But it would be 2 years. It would not be by the end of the season.
Next question is from Yannick, who asks, how many of Sunday's games would it take before Arif is asking for Carson Wentz to replace McCarthy? I was wrong, by the way, in pre-show. This was sent before the Carson Wentz.
So I figured, because it didn't make sense, right? Because Sunday's games would be the McCarthy game that was poor. And so how many poor McCarthy games would it take for me to call for Carson Wentz? And the thing is, like, by the time I would get to the point where I was like, yeah, it's cooked for the season, the Vikings will probably have lost too many games for the playoffs to be reasonable. And then why would you play Carson at that point anyway? Like, I don't like, my answer is never, but not for the reason that you think. It's not because I hate Carson Wentz, which, like, I do, but more because I want to give McCarthy enough time for it to force the issue. And by the time that happens, you've probably maybe not been eliminated from the playoffs, but you're probably out of the picture. Now, it is possible that McCarthy has games that are like Sunday's game and the Vikings win because that defense has the potential to be, league leading, right? It can be outstanding. But, it's unlikely. So very few circumstances where that would happen, where it would get to the point where you'd want to replace him. And also the Vikings are at a point where replacing him does anything meaningful for you.
Next question is going to be from Skimbleshanks the Railway Cat, who asks, if we were to panic trade a first rounder for a quarterback a la 2016, who is the funniest realistic choice not named Kirk Cousins?
This is one of the ones that I was like, oh, I got to come up with some answers pre-show. So I think from least funny to most funny, I picked 5. I don't know. These guys aren't going to go for a first rounder. Maybe one of them would, and it's probably the one that was a first rounder most recently. But I think Gardner Minshew is the least funny that you could do it for. But it would make sense, and he's a character, he's a personality, so you could do that. I think the next least funny, but the one that is a first rounder, is Anthony Richardson. I think that's the only one where you can maybe argue he'd garner a first round pick. I doubt it, but it's the closest we could get to that, I think. But Anthony Richardson is the next most funny. It is funny because he's bad, right? But also, you kind of the seeds have been planted for that to happen, right? With O'Connell hugging him after the game, saying, "Hey man, you're going to be good," and him also saying, young quarterbacks fail organizations less often than organizations fail young quarterbacks. It seems like in response to Richardson. So that would be kind of the next one. That's a little funny. Zach Wilson is very funny because of the Sam Darnold Jets thing. Again, not a first rounder, but that I think would be extremely funny. And I think that the funniness quotient increases, I think, dramatically from Richardson to Wilson. And then from there, you get into just some real funny stuff. So Jameis Winston's my next most funny because it's Jameis Winston. Insane character, Jameis Winston, just an inherently funny quarterback if you don't think about the off-field stuff where he has been a terrible person. And then Teddy, which is both funny and heartwarming. But yeah, I think Teddy would be the funniest because it's the most run it back kind of choice that you could make, where it's maybe with the right coach, maybe this time, maybe he could do it. The funny part here is that a substantial portion of the Vikings fan base, which may or may not include members of this podcast, would believe after just one reasonably okay game.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Despite the overpaying, we would love it.
Yeah. He was a free agent. It's not like Anthony Richardson where you couldn't have had him if you wanted him. He was signed with the team. No, Teddy was a free. You could have just signed him, and you didn't. You chose Carson.
Let's go to Kwai, who asks, is it possible that JJ's injury is not serious enough to require missing games, but this is a polite way to bench him for a few weeks?
So I responded to Hayden Winks, whose work I typically appreciate a lot. He was one of the winners for most accurate big boards one year. So I'm not saying this because I think he's a hot take artist, but we disagreed really strongly on this. So when it was announced, Hayden said, "Suspicion the Vikings are hiding behind injury," and then he has a video attached. "This is JJ McCarthy on the second to last play. Looks to be moving well. Not touched on the last play either. Ruled on a Monday? Really?" So he's got 2 arguments here, right? And a third kind of implied argument. One, that he's moving well enough, right? That he's clearly not injured. And so they made that up in order to kind of preserve his ego or pride or confidence or whatever is the most or least flattering version of that, depending on what you want. And then the second argument is, why would you rule someone out on a Monday? And then some of the other arguments here are essentially, maybe he was hurt, but obviously he played poorly, and this is a polite way to bench him and stuff like that. But he got stepped on on the broad, we saw him get stepped. We saw him get like stepped on a throw. We saw him get rolled up on a sideline run or a scramble, I should say. The broadcast remarked on it. He went to the medical tent, like the blue medical tent. It was reported by both the broadcast and reporters at the scene that he would go inside the tent, and then he comes out and he gets his ankle taped up. Like, come on. Like, he's clearly hurt, right? So then the next argument is, well, I'm not saying he's not hurt. I'm saying, he's clearly not hurt enough that if he was playing well, this is the decision they would make. So they're only making this decision because he's playing poorly, but they do have an injury to point to make it legitimate. Is like in the next, like if I'm moving a goalpost, which let's say that that's what's happening here, that's how I would move it. But like, does that track with O'Connell's history? Because he stuck with Joshua Dobbs for a while after Nick Mullins returned from IR and he was the intended backup the whole time. He gave Joshua Dobbs a whole additional game than I think most people would. And he also like until like the Vegas game, right? So like there's that. And then we also saw him stick with Sam Darnold through a really rough 3 or 4 week stretch in the middle of the season. I think he sticks with quarterbacks. I think he lets them play through it. That's typically been his approach, and he's been very public about the way organizations treat quarterbacks. Very public. It's basically his brand at this point. And it seems like he would be so counter to both his public brand and to his private, strongly held beliefs to do something like bench a quarterback because they're having trouble. I think that he would only do this in a scenario where a quarterback is too hurt to play. So then the next question that you might bring up if you're a believer of the conspiracy is, well, why was he moving well? And I can't believe that I'm the one saying this as like primo spreadsheet nerd, but like, have you ever played a sport? That's crazy to me that you would say that, because there are a ton of, or even just watched enough football, there are a ton of injuries that you sustain in the moment that you have the ability to play through that you might not even feel. Even if you might feel it, you might not even feel it, right? And you just play through it. And then the next day, especially ankles, this happens a lot. The next day, your ankle is swollen to the size of like a grapefruit, right? And it's stiff and you can't move, right? And then add in the fact that in addition to adrenaline and the fact that these guys have just insane levels of pain tolerance generally. Like I think people don't appreciate the pain tolerance that football players have. They also have access to the sweet stuff. And I'm not saying the Vikings overprescribe painkillers or overuse painkillers on the sideline, but I'm saying that they are there and that we know that players will use painkillers to get through pain when movement is functional. And that is a possibility that in addition to adrenaline, it could be a painkiller like Toradol. Not saying that that definitely happened. That would allow him to move freely. And a lot of people in the replies are saying, hey, I've had this happen. I've had a high ankle sprain or I've had an ankle sprain. And I didn't know how bad I could move just as well as I typically had done until 6 hours later or until I went to bed. Like I've had this experience as a child playing soccer. So it's wild to me that. Also funny that would have been a good spot for a debate story. But it's wild to me that like people who have watched football a lot have not seen players do like this happened specifically to JJ McCarthy. Like he did it in the preseason against the Raiders where he full tore his meniscus and no one knew until the next day. Like come on. So that answers, I think, that particular thing. But the idea that it's odd to rule out a player on Monday, well, first of all, O'Connell didn't rule out JJ McCarthy. What he had said was, it's looking like we need to get Carson Wentz. I'm still paraphrasing, but I'm going to try to paraphrase closer to the intended meaning here. It's looking like we need to get JJ McCarthy ready for next week. He didn't say McCarthy was definitely playing, the Carson Wentz ready for next week. He didn't say that Wentz was definitely playing next week. He said that they'll be preparing as if that's the necessity, but they will monitor McCarthy because these things always seem the worst the day after, and it could get a lot better after the day we diagnose it. So we will see, but we will practice as if Wentz is our starter. He didn't say those specific words, but that seems to be kind of the intended meaning. He wasn't definitive. He wasn't certain. He didn't say so-and-so is ruled out. He just said, hey, McCarthy suffered an injury. you're going to see, you reporters who I'm in the room with right now are going to go to Vikings practice, and you're going to see Carson Wentz take first team reps. And if I don't get ahead of this, you're all going to be mad at me. So, and appropriately so. So I'm telling you now, that's what's happening. I think that's good, and he should be praised for doing that. And we've seen this happen a ton of times where, because there's media availability on Monday with the head coach for Sunday games all the time, every team. And in that media availability, they give you updates on injuries. They do it all the time. We saw it last week with like Andrew Van Ginkel, right? Like, why is the Monday thing sticking out to people? That's strange to me, and I don't understand why that would be a thing. So yeah, that's how I feel about that. I think that there is no evidence to suggest that the Vikings are using an injury to kind of sneak a benching in there. This is not me saying that I trust the Vikings or organizations like NFL teams implicitly not to lie to reporters or to fans. They do it all the time. I'm saying that if you want to make that kind of accusation, you need better evidence than this. And I think that if you have like 100,000 followers or 80,000 followers or 40,000 or even just 10,000, very big account brained there. But like, if you've got a sizable following, you have an obligation to not do that kind of stuff, I think. At least until you have stronger evidence than he moved well, which happens all the time with injured players, and they announced it on a Monday, which happens all the time with injured players. And like, I think it's important to understand what the reaction of a local beat is, because if a beat is suspicious, they have experience with how that coach operates historically, and they also have access to sources inside the building. So both experience and resources to kind of tell you if something seems wrong. And I haven't heard anything from anybody associated with the beat position suggesting that this is the case. And I don't think that they're necessarily super friendly to Kevin O'Connell. They are like treating him, I think, better than most media treat most coaches, but that's because most coaches don't have his record. I think he's winning, so they give him the benefit of the doubt, right? Which I think, happens with Kansas City and Andy Reid. It happens with Nick Sirianni in Philadelphia and other teams that are winning but don't have Super Bowl rings. I think that I think it's silly to suggest this. If it was Zimmer, right, I would be much more open to the idea, except we also know Zimmer will just sometimes tell you stuff, right? He's like, oh, no, I mean, he's hurt, but that's not why we benched him. We benched him because he's playing bad. But like, Zimmer has lied to the media. He's felt bad about it, which is kind of funny and refreshing. But he has lied to the media before, and as we were getting later into the tenure, he was much more likely to try and mislead or not tell the full truth or be as honest as he typically was. But like, I would more likely believe that than of a coach who consistently shows faith in struggling quarterbacks for an injury that verifiably happened and required treatment in a situation that we've seen a million times, where a player has an injury substantially expand in its severity hours or a day after the inciting incident for that injury. So I don't think that's what's happening. I don't think that's how Kevin O'Connell operates. I think that he wants quarterbacks to have experience and to push through bad games. So yeah, I don't think that happened.
Next question is going to be from Ben, who asks, is it better to wait longer to get Darisaw back and deal with the O-line struggles on the left side, or should the team focus on getting him back in the lineup ASAP?
Well, I assume this was asked before McCarthy was not ruled out, right? I just caught myself. Was probably going to miss the next week. But yeah, wait. I was going to say I don't care about Carson Wentz's health, and I understand how bad that sounds given everything that we just went through, but I don't care about any backup's health relative to the starter's health. Now, as humans, I care a lot, but like, now I'm just balancing the very human needs for the health and wellness of somebody like Christian Darisaw against the health and wellness of Carson Wentz. And as like humans intrinsically, it's like pretty difficult to make that determination. So as players, I will say, yeah, Darisaw is more important as a player. And so do what you can to preserve his long-term health, now knowing that you don't have to make a complicated decision between the relative potential health of JJ McCarthy and rushing Darisaw back from injury or whatever. But the way the situation has evolved, probably since this question has been asked, has added some very easy outs in the clarity of how to resolve this.
Next question is from HVAC Repairman, who asks, where is the best place to cry after a terrible loss? I found that the shower can be cathartic because who wouldn't want to be trapped in a hot, steamy room with artwork of Arif on the shower curtain looking right at you, comforting you after a painful loss. Do you have a better place?
I mean, a shower without a shower curtain that has my face on it, I think is an ideal place. I don't think you need. I think my face detracts from that experience, I would argue. If that's not possible, if every shower in your house has shower curtains with my face on it and you can't replace them for whatever reason, I would suggest if you have a walk-in closet because it's like dark but enclosed. If you don't, not a lot of people do, I understand. I think a small bedroom is fine. It's totally fine to use a small bedroom, or just in your bed. You could curl up in the bed, cry in there. That's a time-honored tradition, I think. I think that if you want to make other people uncomfortable, the study room of a library, especially the one that has like glass walls instead of like, privacy, that's good. Yeah, I think those are probably kind of like, if you want to be alone, probably the walk-in closet. If you want to like really make it other people's problems, but without like being asked to leave, study room of a library.
And if you're able to wait until you're at work, if you're able to hold off until you're at work, walk-in freezer. If you work in the service industry and in restaurants, walk-in freezer is a good place for that.
I like that. Yeah, that's thinking outside the box. I like it.
Yep. JJ McDarnold asks, how many yards has Ty Felton prevented on punt returns against, and how big of a difference does that make? Also, why did our defensive line suck so bad?
Okay, so the defensive line didn't suck. It just wasn't good in one very clear phase of the game. That's just want to be clear on that one. Okay, so let me net yards over average. Let me see if I can find. Do I have like punting net yards over average? No, come on. I hate this site. So I was at NFL GSIS, which is like a media site, which is a live feed of the NFL statistics, but it's like a mess to navigate. So it's me back at my favorite actual statistics site, Pro Football Reference, which I have a partnership with, but I don't know. Like, do I have an affiliate? I don't know. I don't think I have an affiliate. I don't get anything by promoting them, but they rule. So whatever. So the Vikings have punted 11 times, which is the second most, excluding these Monday night games, which it didn't seem like there were a lot of punts in them anyway. The second most of any team in the league this year with 11, right? They also have the seventh best net yards per punt. I would argue that on about a third of these punts, so there's only 14 punts, so let's say about 5 of these punts, he is doing substantial work to prevent yardage. On a lot of these punts, it's, he either didn't win, so it doesn't really help, or another gunner got there at the same time, or the hang time was just so substantial, it didn't matter who it was. So like all of those could be in play here, right? But let's say about a third of them, he had a substantial or meaningful role. I think on average, the best punt gunner, which let's say Ty Felton is, versus the worst punt gunner is probably about 5 yards per punt. That's a pretty replaceable position. So the replacement quality there is relatively high. I mean, we've seen what happens if the Vikings have bad punt gunners, and it's not good, but it's not like catastrophic. So I would say, given that we have about 500 net yards, we're saving about 15 yards over 2 games. Now, obviously, the worse your offense is, the better the punt gunner is going to be for you. But if it's like 15 yards over 2 games or 7.5 yards per game, then over a season, you're saving about 130 yards. Hooray. That's not nothing, but it's also not enormous. So last year, the highest net yards per punt belonged to Corey Bojorquez, who has finally learned to hold, by the way. So congrats. And the difference between him in total net yards versus second place, he also had the most punts because he was a Browns punter, was over 300 yards. If we wanted to do it by yards per punt, the difference between, let's do 45.8 times a typical punt number is about 50, and then 44.8 times 50. I could adjust it. That's 50. I don't need to do the math there. Good work, Arif. That's about 50 yards. So the difference between first and second in net yards per punt is about like 1/3 of the difference that Ty Felton brings versus, and I'm totally guessing. These are all guesstimates. I'm making these broad, who knows guesses. But based off of approximations, I would say that it is maybe the difference between the first and 7th ranked punter. Hooray.
I'm proud of Ty Felton.
Good.
He's doing.
And was you a 3rd round pick?
No. Anton asks, this O-line is starting to look like the ship of Theseus already going into week 3. When is it no longer a line? Week 5?
Okay, so I think we're hitting a category error here with the ship of Theseus. There at no point in the telling of the thought puzzle, there's thought experiment. I was like, I know there's a word for this. At no point in that exercise are we ever questioning if it's a ship. It's just, is it the same ship? And the great thing about like the way we talk about offensive lines is it's not the same offensive line, even if it's the same 5 people sometimes. Because it's like, well, he got hurt and he's playing hurt. So it's not really the same offensive line. When you replace one of them, people talk about it like it's a different offensive line. So we're not in an offensive line of Theseus thing. Like, it is still always an offensive line, but it is never the intended offensive line. So I don't think we have an offensive line of Theseus problem here. I think this one is neatly resolved by the standards that we typically use, that we assign to offensive lines.
Let's go to Dr. TWD, who asks, Patrick Mahomes seems okay-ish this year. How much would it take to get him from the Chiefs? Could we let the Royals absorb the Twins to make it happen?
Well, okay, so the problem here is that Mahomes has a pretty substantial cap hit, and at some point pretty soon he's going to hit a cash deadline where he's going to want to restructure it and get more money up front. That's going to be tough. And so obviously the Chiefs are actually going to have to send the Vikings draft picks so that the Vikings can relieve the Chiefs of that burden. So the cap hit is the issue here. The Vikings don't have a lot of cap space. And the Chiefs, who, are very clearly cap conscious, as you could see from when they traded Tyreek Hill all the way back and when they didn't, when they traded away Joe Thuney, that is something that the Vikings will be doing as a favor to the Chiefs. And so really, the last time, the most memorable kind of cap space trade that we have is when the Browns traded for Brock Osweiler and received functionally a late 2nd round pick, if I remember correctly, in return. And I think, you should, the Vikings would have to send something for the trade to actualize, from my understanding. So I would say the Vikings send one of the 6 that they got for the trades that they've made this offseason and receive Patrick Mahomes in a second for doing the Chiefs the favor of relieving him of this cap problem.
I think that this could be good for both teams. Yeah,
it's a win-win.
Yeah, and as a part owner, I feel like you have an obligation to present this. Mm-hmm. The mailman asks, are the Packers as good as the Bears are bad?
The Packers defense is as good as has been advertised through 2 games. I am remaining suspicious about the Packers offense, which is not to say the Lions defense is bad. Just saw what they did to the Bears. But rather that Jordan Love plays a very volatile game, and it's going to take me like 4 or 5 games in a row of high-level play before I'm like, oh, no, he's just doing this now. That's just a thing that he does now, as opposed to he's benefiting from variance and streakiness right now, and so he's going to have high-level offensive performances. And while that's happening, while that defense is playing as well as it does, that's going to look like a juggernaut. But he just like makes mistakes. So the Packers are very good, but mostly because of the defense. And I obviously hate saying that.
Genderless Fraternal Order asks, who won the Panthers-Bear trade? It turns out the rest of the league.
Yeah, I think someone in the Discord was like the rest of the league in response to this. And I don't have a better answer than that. That's, whew, boy. I mean, I guess Bryce Young looks like a better prospect right now than Caleb Williams, but, the bars in hell, et cetera, and so forth.
Yeah. My 4-year-old plans to replace me asks, question for Arif's medical advice corner. What advice would you give to Joe Burrow to solve his turf toe issues? Also, what exactly is turf toe and how does it differ from a stub toe, besides presumably the location where it was stubbed?
Okay, so turf toes are actually extremely painful and serious injuries, and they just have a bad name. It's a bad PR for an injury. Genuinely difficult injury to, like a stub toe is just pain. Sometimes if you stub your toe hard enough, you can break a toe bone. That's different. But for the most part, a stub toe just sucks and it's painful. A turf toe is a joint sprain. It's a ligament tear. It's extremely painful. There are multiple grades of turf toe. It sounds like Joe Burrow's turf toe grade is a grade 3, which is a complete tear, which means that in addition to the foot just swelling up, you can't push off of it because the ligaments aren't there to allow you to. Now, a grade 1 turf toe, you can't push off of it because of pain. But a grade 3 turf toe, you can't push off of it because it won't work. And that requires surgical intervention. So it's really painful. The reason it's called turf toe is because it happens more often on artificial surfaces because they have less give, which is also the reason that people run faster on turf than they do on grass. So there's an athletic benefit, but there's an injury risk. So that's why it's called turf toe, not because it's a tiny injury that sometimes like a baseball player like cracks a nail and now he can't play, and you're like, God, baseball players, that's crazy. Well, I mean, knuckleball pitchers specifically, but like, God, that's nuts. It's like it sounds like that, but it actually sucks a lot more. Is I guess what I want to get across. Like, it sounds like, oh my God, I can't believe he cracked a nail and now he can't pitch, which is real, especially if you're a knuckleball pitcher. Like, you can't, but It is like an actual, like the player is suffering from pain as a product of this.
Next question is from Nick, who asks, now that Carson Wentz is going to start a game for us, will Arif be getting an emotional support animal, and what animal will that be? It's
obviously going to be a fighting hawk. There's no other answer than that, right? Like, that has to be it.
You know what? I hadn't even considered that. We're going to go off the rails for the next couple of quick questions. Nolan Kaler asks, for someone who claims to hate everything about him, Arif seems to trust Luke Braun about a lot of football-related things.
No evidence of
How
that.
Can he, given that he will lose his Hell League matchup because he left Brock Purdy in as the starting quarterback?
Okay, so I don't trust Luke Braun, and I dislike him, and I don't like to give him credit, but refusing to pay attention to the Hell League is probably the best way to manage that.
Actually, he's still using AI to determine his, in his words, he's using ChatGPT to determine who his starting outfit should be.
Oh, that's really funny. Wait, so if ChatGPT doesn't know about the kicker on bye rule or whatever it is, that you must have an active kicker rule.
Yep.
2 kickers. Is he going to abide by what ChatGPT says and like start Jake Moody or whatever?
He did last year.
But did ChatGPT do that?
I would have to check with him, but I do know that he ran the ChatGPT thing last year as well.
That's extremely funny. Okay,
he did not do well last year in our league.
You're telling me AI is not good at fantasy football? That's crazy. This is the first time I'm hearing this.
It's unfortunate. Room Don Sharif asks for Arif's thruple corner.
God. Okay.
If a thruple used your advice and watched the early games and 2 of the 3 of them won, so the other had to cook dinner this Sunday while the other 2 made out. Okay. Unfortunately, the loser has little cooking experience and the meal was awful. On the path to winning this thruple, how much should one try to make this person cook in order to make them lose points in the thruple? How often would be too often? where they would become actually like practiced at cooking and start becoming good and leapfrogging the others in the thruple standings.
Okay, so you also get points for cooking, I guess, in this scenario, right? Like
thruple standings. This is good.
This is so stupid. I'm not in a thruple. I don't know anything about thruples. Now I'm beginning to hate the word. You don't like relationships aren't about winning. But
so says a loser.
Oh my god. It is so infuriating that we're having this discussion at the one moment in history that your relationship situation is more stable than mine.
It's amazing.
the one, like the precise point. God. Okay. So anyway,
we're picking a date and everything.
I'm not going to get the nature of any dates I might be going on or not subject. We're not talking about that. Anyway, the thruple thing. I hate that sentence. Oh my God. Okay. So if we are accepting the multiple premises that are wrong, the multiple incorrect premises in this question about whether you should subject members of a throuple to a loser's punishment based off of what happens in a football game, which is not advice I gave, is the opposite of the advice that I gave. But if you accept that awful premise and also the additional implied premise here that cooking can gain or lose points based off of the quality of that cooking, how often is it? The question is, should you mix up what that loser punishment is so they don't gain the skill and experience that they need in order to become good enough at cooking where they start gaining points, which is crazy manipulation given that the points are probably decided by the other two members of a throuple anyway. And so the refs are also deciding whether or not to manipulate the point. Like you could just lie and not give them the points at this point if you don't care about relationships and are intent on winning, as opposed to having a strong and healthy set of communication standards and practices where you respect each other's, feelings and have a good understanding of each other's obligations and duties to each other. But if it's just about winning points, I don't see why you wouldn't lie then about the points. But okay, let's say you're honest about the scoring system, but not honest about how you're going to get people into the scoring system anyway, which is so convoluted at this point. Then yeah, I guess change up the weekly chore that the loser gets, assuming that it's the same loser every time, which it's not going to be because that's what football is like, right? Like it's not like two of them are cheering for the 2007 Patriots and one of them is cheering for the 2009 Lions. I guess it's technically possible that you could be in a somewhat, but that's not likely, right? Like you're going to be winning and losing, and so the other one or other two are going to be setting up different. Like it's not happening like that week to week, so you're not building up that experience quickly enough anyway to get reasonably good at cooking, so you don't have to worry about it. But also, if you are, and I know so many people who've cooked a lot and don't get better at it, so like that's not a given. Then yeah, I guess switch up the tasks, like taking out the garbage or sweeping or vacuuming or doing the laundry or do the dishes or other stuff, I guess. I don't know. I hate this.
Francis Ford Copium asks for Arif's Nerd Corner. Have you ever played Warhammer 40k? And if yes or no, what faction would you play? And did Magnus do anything wrong?
Okay, I did not look up the elements of this question beforehand, so I'm gonna super have to wing it. I'm gonna okay. So what I know, so I've not played Warhammer 40k. What I'm going to say is my understanding of Warhammer 40k is that orcs are extremely funny, and I think it's orcs with a K, right? So and like the way they work is that if they believe a thing, it's true, but they're like kind of stupid. And I think that's just like a great like dynamic. Like they can't super understand the nature of their ability. Awesome. So my understanding of Magnus is that he's like a chaos lord or something, and he's like a demon. And like intuitively, my answer is like, yeah, you probably did a bunch of things wrong, right? And I'm going to guess because this question is asked, he was like wronged by someone. I know there's like an Imperium, right? So maybe they did something wrong, or there's like a psychic empire. I don't know anything. Okay, so he was probably wronged, and I think that if you are personally wronged by a whole empire, and you decide to become a chaos demon god, that's like a disproportionate response, and I'm against disproportionate responses. So I'm going to say Magnus was wrong. I'm going to get like 3 emails about this alone.
Let's wrap this up with Football's Misandrous Niche, who asks, for Arif's Gulf Monarchy Corner,
why is this even in here?
If you and James were to do a Norse Code episode funded by the Saudi, Emirati, Qatari, or Bahraini governments, how would that affect your content, and which of the 4 above would you prefer?
Okay, I'm going to call it out and say that I was asked this question for racist reasons because my last name is Hassan, and I resent that and I object to that. That said, in answering the question, I wanted to look up if the Bahraini government had done anything evil like the other 3 governments here. Well, like the UAE government, it's difficult kind of to call it one government, but fine. The sheikdoms of the UAE. And as soon as I clicked on the government of Bahrain, I found a controversy section, and it was short, but it was like good enough for me to be like, oh, okay, you're also evil, right? Like all of you are evil. They're probably not equally evil. Like Qatar is like implicated a lot in slave labor for the construction of stadiums for like the World Cup. And also has like this famous track record, but it's not as if like this famous track record of like oppressing queer people, but it's not as if like the other 3 are very good about that either. So while I'm not going to argue that they're morally equivalent, I'm not going to do the work to figure out who's morally equivalent. And instead, I'm going to pick based off of who has the best airline. See if I could find. I did research on who has the best airline because they like famously have like really good airlines, right?
Because if I'm going to travel for this, I need to at least make sure that I am in the absolute lap of luxury.
Yeah. No, I mean that's like if I'm compromising my morals, it better like pay, right?
If
like
I'm not ignoring human rights violations, I better have a good meal.
Right. Like if I'm going to be kept up all night by the tortures that I am contributing to and covering up for, I would at least like a soft pillow to soothe me back to sleep, right? Like, I think that makes sense. So universally, it seems, so for people who aren't familiar, the national airlines of a lot of these Gulf states are famously some of the best in the world, if not the best in the world, particularly their business and first class offerings. They're like comically ostentatious, and it's like an arms race to the top. Generally speaking, especially for first class offerings, but also including business class offerings, Qatar Airways has been the top ranked airline for, I want to say, 4 or 5 years running by people who like regularly rank the first class charters of like various Gulf airlines, which is like a lot of people. It's actually kind of a fun YouTube niche to fall down when you're like, oh, this is so much money that you're wasting on this, but you're having fun, I guess. The comfort offered by those airlines, I like traveling, so like the comfort offered by those airlines, the food offerings, the in-flight entertainment, the amenity packages. I'm going to go with Qatar Airways because they do the most to make you not think about all of the stuff that stuff pays for. So I'm going to go with that. And how would that affect the content of the show? Probably we would be talking a lot less about everything in the second half of the mailbag.
I think the second half of the mailbag would be cut.
Yeah.
This is being brought up because once again, the Saudi Arabian I wasn't going to say government, but the Saudi Arabian money is now bringing Tom Brady out of retirement.
Yeah, like flag football something or other.
Yeah, so he and a number of other players are going to be doing that. Also, they just announced that Saudi Arabia is getting a WrestleMania.
Yeah, well, I mean, they've had like a close relationship with like the WWE for a while, and so getting a WrestleMania was kind of like the
next logical step.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's there's a lot of money changing hands there, and as for we would only be I think. Little known fact, the Saudi Arabian people tend to enjoy the CFL more. So we would be covering more North Code stuff. That's probably a thing.
No, you just made that up. No.
Also, big Carson Wentz fans. So we'd be doing
that's clearly a bit. Okay, got it.
Yeah, so we'll be doing that. And that'll be the end of this episode of Norse Code. We hope you have enjoyed it. Arif, what do you have to plug?
My mental health. Okay. Why left? I've repinned the scouting report that Matt Freese wrote about Carson Wentz. I've still got my piece recapping the game, which talks a lot about kind of obviously the elements that occurred in the game, my take on the game, but primarily kind of my criticism of the way the Vikings have handled the season and offseason thus far with a light to McCarthy. Those are the two pieces I have up. I was going to have a piece about the Vikings slate of pass rushers, but it seems as if both Alex Highsmith and Khalil Mack, who was injured in the game that happened while we were recording, have since been injured since I came up with the idea for this piece. And I like Myles Garrett. I don't want him to get hurt, so maybe I'm not going to write that piece. So I'm going to come up with another idea for a piece this week. Hopefully Matt Freese comes up with an idea for a piece and submits it. We've got a lot of good content coming.
So that's it for this episode of Norse Code. We hope you have enjoyed it. We'll be back on Thursday Friday morning, to discuss the Bengals matchup. So for Arif, my name is James. Thank you guys so much for listening. And please remember, now more than ever, that the horrors persist, and so does Carson Wentz. And we will be back soon. Norse Code is the largest and only division of Norse Code LLC. You can find Norse Code on the Daily Norseman, SB Nation's Vikings blog, at dailynorseman.com. You can also find it on iTunes, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, Google Play, and wherever fine podcasts are aggregated. Our Vikings blogger extraordinaire and generally useful human is Arif Hassan of... and he can be found on Twitter at Arif Hassan NFL. I am your producer and host, and my name is James Pagashnik. You can find me at the show's official Twitter feed at NorseCodeDN or at my personal account at Big Mono. If you'd like to donate a few bucks to the show, you can do so in a couple of different ways. You can go to patreon.com/NorseCode and donate there. For $3.50 a month, you get bonus material and more. You can also go to paypal.me/NorseCode for a one-time donation, or you can go to norsecode.threadless.com and pick up some Norse Code merch. Any questions or comments that cannot fit in a tweet can be sent to norsecodepodcast@gmail.com. On behalf of the Norse Code staff, we thank you so much for listening.
Our formula is this.
All things are possible through the power of Ben DiNucci.